Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Let's start our afternoon session. Our next invited speaker is Florence. Pete is a senior research scientist at Google Deepmind. He works on robotics, AI, particularly in the area such as global manipulation, computer vision, and natural language. Before joining Google, he did his PhD in computer science at MIT with Lost Fabric. His work includes best paper awards for finalists at Coral, CPR, EQUA, and IAL. Welcome. You can start.
Thank you for the nice intro, and thanks for the organizers for inviting me. I hope everybody's having a great time in Atlanta. I love Coral. It's a great conference. I'm calling in from San Francisco today, and the reason is I just had a baby. For those of you that don't know, neonatology, I just learned this, a couple months ago. Neonatology means the study of newborn infants. It's a subspecialty of pediatrics. And here's the baby. Her name is Phoebe. She's very cute. This picture, she's about 6.5 weeks old. I'm reading her Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You might be thinking, wait, can she read already? No, she can't read already, but she already likes, having people read books to her and looking around. And we're going to talk more about that. So this is Phoebe. And it's a classic, right? AI researcher has a baby, won't stop talking about watching them learn. I think it happens all the time. I think, though, that usually when I hear the kind of narrative about baby learning and development and how that relates to robotics and AI research, I usually am thinking of something that looks more like what we have here on the right, which is babies that are out in the world and they're like touching a bunch of stuff and they're picking things up and they're maybe starting to locomote around. And of course, for the parents in the audience, I think everybody who's a parent has a good sense of kind of the development of a baby over their lifetime. But I know from some data that, well, first of all, these are babies at a year old. I know some data that quite a chunk of AI researchers have no idea what a baby looks like between the ages of 0 to 2 months, especially because, they're not vaccinated and stuff. You don't often, I think, until you have a baby, at least for me, my amount of time that I've spent with a baby in the range of 0 to 2 months, and Phoebe's about 2 months old, has increased by a factor of about 1,000 in the last couple of months. And so I've learned a whole bunch more. And what does that phase of life look like? And I think this is an underappreciated time to be looking at for kind of inspiration and how we think about training robots. Okay, so one place to kind of look at it, kind of population level, what are babies doing around this time, is the CDC. I was referred to this by one of our neonatologists. It's just a good sort of standard set of milestones that you might be expecting your baby to be doing by around by different ages. They have different increments of ages. Here's some at 2 months. So even just at 2 months old, they can already look at and recognize your face, look at a toy for several seconds. These are amazing because these are not things that they do at all when they come out, right? They smile when you talk to them. That's like an awesome one to hit once they do that. They can react to loud noises. There's all these things that they're doing, right? Those last ones were from the CDC, and those were kind of like milestones to hit. But just in case people, again, are familiar with like what a baby looks like in this sort of 0 to 2 months phase, they're not just also hitting these milestones. They're also just kind of doing not much of anything, right? Just kind of wiggling around. They're not calibrated yet. They have no sort of purposeful control over any of their limbs. And they just do a whole bunch of just looking around at stuff. But they do start very quickly, and just a couple weeks in, they love looking at high contrast visual patterns. And they're starting, before they can really do any kind of meaningful manipulation, any kind of locomotion, they love to look at visual patterns. A bunch of people buy these high contrast cards for them, or also just high contrast visual patterns in the natural environment, like window blinds. Babies love window blinds, right? And they can, pretty soon after that, they can start to track visual patterns. I thought this was amazing, like holding my baby and watching their eyes just like run around the room. And as I would bounce around, they track, visual patterns in the room. They can do sort of like ego tracking, like inside out, as in addition to here, what's shown is somebody holding up one of these high contrast cards and the baby's tracking it. It's just amazing to see this happen, right? And around this time too, they can start to track objects, right? Very important. And this one I think is a little advanced. This baby's maybe like 3 months 3 months or so old. This is I found this on YouTube. But it's even possible for them in this time to start to learn baby sign language. If you guys don't know what baby sign language is, go look up later baby sign language. Pretty amazing. You can start to learn, not full natural language, but different things like, hey, I'm about to change your diaper and stuff like that. Okay, so I think this is very interesting, and I feel like not that well appreciated, especially by people who aren't parents, which is that before the development of manipulation and locomotion skills, babies can already recognize high contrast visual patterns, visually track objects, visually recognize faces, react to loud noises. I'll also put a question mark on this one because this is from the CDC, but at least this is what my daughter does. She can learn associations with certain songs. There's all of this learning that's happening in these first couple months, right? Okay. Another one, and I knew this actually from back in college. Yep. What's up?
You just learned last week.
Did it drop on my back?
I think you're back. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'm back. Cool. So this I know is a sort of a major belief in early childhood education. And again, I knew this from a long time ago. I did some research looking around the literature to see if, how much of this is a thing. It seems like very much a pretty widely agreed upon thing that the number of words spoken to the baby, of course, it's not the only thing, but this can be roughly correlated to different types of development outcomes, at least at population level, right? And there's a whole bunch of debates on this. I don't want to get into it, but in addition to just quantity, of course, also the quality and diversity of the words that are just sort of uttered at the baby. This is also an important thing, I think, in machine learning, quality versus quantity. This comes to mind as well, of course. Okay, so now you might be wondering, wait, I thought this was a workshop on neural representational learning for robot manipulation, representations of scenes and objects. Why are we talking about babies? Why are we about to talk about large multimodal models? And what about neural representation learning? These are all valid questions, and hopefully going to go through them. Okay, so first, before I have I think in some ways, some pretty simple observations, but just to help convince you in case we're not acquainted, that I don't know, I've thought a lot about this stuff. Like the general topic of neural object scene representations and their role in manipulation, I just did sort of like a quick, made a collage. I think I've written something like 13 papers or so on this general topic area. And so it's an area that I've thought a lot about. And so again, I think some of these next few slides, they might seem very simple, but I actually think from a lot of thinking about this, these are some of the core questions. Okay. So one is, for a while, I think maybe some people in this field would maybe kind of think there's this kind of a debate. And I think it's maybe the wrong debate. And I've thought before it's the wrong debate, but for different reasons. And the debate might be, should we either A, design in object or scene representations inside a robot visuomotor policy or something like it? Or should we B, just use end-to-end visuomotor learning with vanilla networks for the robot policy? And actually, both, as you probably know, can work pretty well. There's advantages of maybe just doing one versus the other, but they can both work pretty well. But if you care about object and scene representations, you kind of have to ask yourself this question. I don't see how you avoid it. And I think it's interesting that in the case of babies, they don't do either, right? They have one pretty big neural net. They learn some notions of visual patterns and object representations. And then they use the same neural net to learn manipulation. Maybe obvious, but I do think this crystallizes something. Again, maybe obvious to many people, but I think it's useful to say that at least two ways to think about having a robot brain with object and scene representations is one, to design some type of object or scene representation into the learning, or two, train a general purpose neural net to solve object and scene representation tasks, and then also use that same neural net to solve manipulation tasks. Okay, again, maybe very simple. I think useful to think about. So what if we had a massive multimodal model and we took a massive amount of internet scale language data and we trained the model with it? We also took a massive amount of internet scale vision language data, trained the model with it, and that's including many tasks that require what we might call object and scene understanding. And then we take a whole bunch of robot planning and embodied VQA data, and we also throw that in and train the model with that. And that includes tasks that we would say require some embodied object and scene understanding. And what if we train this massive model, right? And that is one of the stories of Palmy. If you haven't read the paper, I highly recommend you go do so. I'm not going to give an overview, but this is one of the main things of what we do, right? And just to like take a look at some examples of object and scene understanding that Palmy can do, this is a visual captioning task. So given that this one with the bowl of fruit, given that image, what's in the image, answer in emojis. So it's picking out different objects, doing like object recognition, and just listing them out. Here's an example of a spatial grounding task. So there's a couple donuts and some labels, and it says, what flavor is the donut on the right? This text is small, but its answer is strawberry. And then if you just let it continue and continue doing generation, and then it'll say, what flavor is the donut on the left? Blueberry, which is also correct. Or here even, this is pretty complex, spatial multi-object reasoning. Photo 1 is that top photo. Photo 2 is the bottom photo. The question to the model is, what is in photo 1 but not in photo 2? Think step by step and explain. And Palmy can give an answer of, photo 1 has sunglasses on top of folded clothes. Photo 2 does not have sunglasses on top of folded clothes. Therefore, sunglasses are in photo 1 but not in photo 2. So this is really, I think, a remarkable amount of object and scene understanding. Of course, mileage varies on different types of tasks, but the capability is there, and these models are getting better and better. And you can go a step further, and you can just have the same model not only do object and scene understanding, but also do planning, right? So here's a robot. I'm a robot. I'm a robot operating in a kitchen. Given this image, what do I see? It can pick out all the different ingredients it sees on the table, and then you can prompt it to make a list of step-by-step how to turn it into cake. And it can come up with a list that, is not directly connecting it to robot actions, but is a pretty reasonable list. Okay. So what if we also take the same model and we also put in robot low-level visuomotor action data? And that is something that we do with RT2, paper at Coral Conference. Highly recommend you go and talk with all the authors that are there at the conference. Okay. And just to show the diversity of, although this is very simple, but the diversity of this type of approach, we also did a collaboration with some folks on the MedPalm team, where we curated a whole bunch of a suite of biomedical tasks, and we trained. It was actually literally the Palmy model. We took a Palmy checkpoint, trained with a whole bunch of robot tasks, and then we fine-tuned it on a bunch of biomedical tasks. And then this model is state of the art on a wide set of these biomedical benchmarks. So it's very simple, but it's a pretty powerful approach, and I think we need to think a lot about it. So one thing I think it's kind of fun to do is to revisit Le Cake. Some of you might know what Le Cake is, as Jan LeCun, however many years ago, put out this model of a cake where the middle of the cake, the core part of the cake is self-supervised learning, and the icing is supervised learning, and just the cherry on top is reinforcement learning. I think there's a lot of nice wisdom baked into this, no pun intended. But what if we think about Le Cake in 2023? Because it's been a few years, and I would propose a very simple version of kind of a hierarchy of importance that kind of well reflects the post LLMs existing world and how it relates to Le Cake, which is that the core part of it is just data. The icing is just really good data. And then to the cherry on top is all the fine tuning. A lot of people call it different things, whether it's supervised fine tuning or LHF. That's kind of a Le Cake in 2023 model. And then how about a robot Le Cake? And I think, the idea of these large multimodal models that also then just do robotics is it helps us with kind of our data challenge in robotics, that we don't need a lot of robot data, and we just kind of sprinkle on these sprinkles of robot data onto this cake, and then we have a model that does all these other things and is also pretty good at robotics. That's the idea, right? So let us address the rise of large multimodal models. I think it is an important moment that we have them now. So we'll say that a large multimodal model is likely to win at blank robot task compared to an all else being equal model for fill in the blank. And is this true right now? No. There's certainly tasks that require learning that you don't need a large multimodal model, but eventually this might end up being the case. And for the folks maybe in the room that are not, I guess this is a Coral, so but there's a lot of robotics that's not just learning still, but for at least the learning parts, I think this is maybe a reasonable statement. And on the one hand, it's an amazing development. On the other hand, I also think it's helpful to keep in mind that this kind of just continues the long thread of pre-training, and it goes even before this. But ImageNet style pre-training was very popular back in kind of 2013, 2014. LLM style pre-training kind of came around 2018. Now multimodal, there's a bunch of other things going on. And in terms of this impacting robotics, even back with Sergey and Chelsea's seminal end-to-end visuomotor paper in 2015, that was using ImageNet pre-training. Many of you might have tried using ImageNet pre-training in different types of robot policies you do. Sometimes it can work pretty well. I think these large multimodal models and pre-training them on tons of language, tons of vision, also now using them for robot models, I think it's kind of in some ways the same thing, just these are significantly more powerful models and mileage tends to be better. So some comments. I didn't attend CVPR this year, but I debriefed with my CVPR buddies. And there was, from what I hear, and it makes sense, a big question in the room of, will large multimodal models just end up making X research topic irrelevant? And I think it's useful to actually ask this question rather than just kind of ignore it. And all these bold numbers and tables, CVPR is great at bold numbers and tables. Well, they all just end up being obliterated by large multimodal models. And I think one thing that is, it's a nice way to think about what large models enable and how we can think about research, is a lot of things that typically might be ors, we can replace them with yes ands. So rather than thinking about, should we use X approach or Y approach, or should we train our model on X data or Y data, large models can just absorb all this stuff and we can kind of do everything. So robot A, yes. Robot B, task C, approach D, different types of sims. The large models can absorb all these things and still be good at all these individual tasks, embodiments, what have you. And I think this is very enabling and useful to think about in terms of how at least some chunk of research can be spread out. And when we have bold numbers and tables, and then something comes along that's even better, I think it's useful to think about that not just the thing that is better is the useful part of the research here, right? But maybe obvious, but I think just helpful to keep in mind that when we have a ton of bold numbers and tables and then something comes along even better, it was really valuable that people tried really hard on all the things that came before it. And the data and the benchmarks and the standards for comparison, they're all there. The computer vision community is really good at that. I think it's just another call for the robotics community to be even better at trying to do that as well. Just some random general research advice that I feel like is relevant to this type of thing, unsolicited research advice. But I think these are just, I don't know, things that keep me happy at the end of the day with thinking about research is focusing on the questions, right? Always be asking new questions and revisiting old ones. And even as the answers change, the questions remain fascinating. And make sure you're having fun, because most research doesn't push the state of the art and all of it eventually becomes obsolete. Make sure you're having fun. And Vincent Van Hook, I think, has a great article on a bunch of these types of related topics. So in addition to object and scene representations, I also think it's useful to focus on the data engines that make the data that then drive our robot learning. That's something I've been long fascinated with. So here's a little bit of just kind of back of the envelope math. I think this is kind of fun to think about. Here's a question. How many bits are in large scale multimodal language and vision pre-training? Of course, it varies, but let's take PAMI as an example. So these are all public numbers. That PAMI was initialized, partially initialized from PALM, which that's public. That was 780 billion tokens, and the vocab size is 256,000. So that's about 1.4 E13 bits. And then on the vision side, by far the largest data set that PALMI was trained on was Webley, which is 10 billion images. And we'll just use that number. And the 224 and 224, that's the image resolution, 3 color channels, 8-bit color. So that's about 1 E16 bits. Okay, so that's the amount of bits that those have. Now, of course, we're ignoring the sort of like information content and the compressibility, but this is at least an upper bound on how much information is in there. Okay, so how many bits are in a single continuous video stream from a robot? Useful to think about, right? Is this internet scale stuff? Is it way bigger than what we have in robotics, or how much? Useful to think about. So robot out in the world, its video stream. Let's say we'll use a similar image resolution just for easy comparison. And we'll say 30 hertz. I think 30 hertz is often a good rate for manipulation and locomotion type tasks. So that's about 3 E7 bits per second. So then what we just need is a lot of seconds. Turns out there's about E7 seconds in a year. So we have about 1 E15 bits in a year. And that's from one robot. Now, most of the time, of course, our robot video streams are not, I would say, quote unquote interesting. A lot of, we all know robots often just kind of sit there. I think we can do a much better job with that. But we can either just make up for that X over 100 with X robots, or we can just increase the percentage of interesting time. So it's, actually good information, and that's not too compressible. Which, jumping around a bit here, but I think this kind of leads to this, is what I'll call the all or nothing embodiment hypothesis. Just trying to have some things to make you think here. The hypothesis is that robot learning capability breakthroughs will eventually only come from multi-embodiment models. And there's a few things in there. I'm not saying research idea breakthroughs, but in terms of the capabilities of learning-based models being able to achieve new breakthrough things, it eventually might only come from multi-embodiment models. And here's the pseudo proof of this. Question 1, do you ever want to change your robot hardware? Even just to tweak it, even just to like change the mounting of, the finger relative to the wrist frame, some type of tiny thing, right? Or will you be forced to due to the supply chain or manufacturing, whatever it is? I think the answer to this question is yes. You eventually want to change your robot hardware. Everybody who's worked on robots for a long time knows this. And when you do change hardware, do you want to throw away all of your previous data? And I think all the machine learning first people in the audience, that's got to be a no. And these two things imply that this hypothesis might be true. Yep. Are we back?
I think we just lost you for like a few seconds. Can you maybe go to pseudo?
Yeah, sure. And it's still a little choppy. Or can folks
We can hear you.
Okay, cool. So
yes,
the text is all there. You want to change your robot hardware, and when you change your hardware, or you'll be forced to, and when you change your hardware, these two imply that we probably need models that can handle multiple embodiments. And there's starting to be work in there, PAMI, RTX, RT2 as well. These are happening. Here's another little thought experiment. This is one of my last little things. So recall that robot researchers typically collect very high quality demonstration data, and it's hard to get high quality demonstration data. And here's just another thing to provoke some thoughts. What if everybody, instead of attending a Coral 23, just collected robot demonstrations? So let's do some rough math here. So instead of attending Coral 2023, I asked Tia and Mark and Sonia, but it's about 800 attendees, 36 hours of conference. And a good robot demonstration setup, you can get about 120 demos per hour. So that would be about 3.5 million demonstrations. A couple other ones. What if instead of reviewing for Coral 2023, well, skip some of the math there, but that's about 1.4 million demonstrations. And then what if instead of doing research for Coral 23, instead of everybody doing research, we just collected demonstrations? That'd be about 230 million. We can check the math later if you want, but somewhere in that range. And this leads to another, I just think, again, I'm just asking some questions that I think I'm not actually saying we should do this, but it's worth considering to maybe motivate us to collect some more data. The why don't we all just collect data conundrum, which is that there's a very non-zero probability that 230 million demonstrations in 1 year would have more impact in advancing capabilities of robot learning than the rest of robot learning research in that year. Again, I just think something to think about. Compared to the existing largest data sets we have, for a single data set, the language table data set, which we did last year or so, that's about 600K demos. And then RTX combines that with a bunch of other embodiments. Very exciting project I was not a part of, but colleagues from Google, and that's a little bit over 1 million. So this would be really quite a massively larger number. And just to clarify, I actually think the robot learning research community and paper reviewing process and everything is amazing, and Coral is awesome. I'm just trying to say, I think it's very possible that we collect a lot more data. Maybe not with that amount of just raw human elbow grease, but I think we can figure it out. So one last thing, we've discussed the rise of large multimodal models, and the models themselves have little structure initialized in them. It's all learned in the data. But is there a role for more structure? And I want to give you, I like to see the both, all the different sides of arguments. And I work in this area too. I want to see, I'm going to give you an argument for structure in 2023 robot learning. And one is that compared with all this LLM stuff, words are not natural physical phenomena. Learning in the space of words benefits from humans curating the development of symbols and language, the invention of the written word and printing press, digital computers, the internet, keyboards, smartphone proliferation, human interaction. we have tons of digitized symbolic data created by humans. And even all the state-of-the-art vision stuff typically uses language supervision as well. And that's, you know, things that win at ImageNet are actually trained on large-scale language image pre-training, not just pure vision stuff, right? So low-level vision, low-level sensory motor interaction, these are raw natural physical phenomena. They're not curated by humans. They're not curated in the equivalent of words, and it's certainly possible that structure significantly improves learning. And I think we see that, right? And for the last 2 years for me or so, one area that I've been looking a lot into is how to use NeRF in robotics. And NeRF, as an example, uses minimal excellent structure. We know how to precisely calibrate and localize cameras. We know a lot about rendering and light, right? So that, I think I'm roughly at time, and that concludes. In this talk, I didn't just kind of go through research paper by research paper. I was more just trying to sort of think about some questions that maybe you find interesting. But here's a list of a whole bunch of research papers that sort of informed all of this type of research. And these are all from prior conferences, just to flash a list at you. And then this handful at Coral this year, I think all relate very deeply to some of these questions and thoughts in this talk. And that's where I conclude. So I don't know if we have some time for discussion. If we do, I'd be happy to take questions. And it was great chatting with you all. Hope you, I don't know, maybe thought about something.
Thanks. Hey. Yeah, we can have time for a few questions if audience have questions. I can start with one.
Sure.
So in your slides, you have this two choice, right? A and B. A is learning object representations. B is not learning, just use all the data. From your talk, you're going towards B. Is that correct? Because you will just use data and serve into the large language models.
Yeah, no, I understand that was your interpretation, but what I was trying to say is I don't think that we need to do A or B. I think that there's a lot of different ways in which neural scene representations can play together with just large scale training. I'll give you one great example of this. I didn't go through this paper at all, but we had a recent paper with some of Chelsea students and Leray, where and also with this other paper we did with the Yenchen, where we use NeRF as a way to significantly increase the quality and quantity of data that we have for training. And so it's sort of, rather than having the neural scene representation in the policy, it sort of helps the overall learning process. That's like one way in which they're very compatible. But actually here in this talk, I was trying to make the point that, the way that babies do it, just as an example, is we train them to do neural and scene perception, and then we also train them to do manipulation. And that's certainly a valid way too.
It's certainly valid. I think we lost you there for a bit.
Okay.
Can you hear us?
Yes. Yep. I can hear you. Yes.
Oh. Okay.
Okay, I guess we lost it for a few seconds, but the answer is there's work on using NeRF, right? That can improve the manipulation side.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. That's one of the short answers. Sure. Yep.
Thanks. Oh yeah, I think
we can. Yeah.
You can speak. I can.
You can.
Oh, you can come to speak.
Large models, because we know that like large models works well now on language, and language as a like my thing is actually not that high dimensional. So I don't know how that scales to like image or robot action, those really high dimensional space. Where do you think, is there a capability where we just can't use the data to achieve it, like train a large language model. And we actually need to put in some like biases or structures.
Yeah, I think these are key questions. I would say on the vision side, that large models are, sort of state of the art in a large set of tasks now, but it's not nearly the same as scaling properties that we see in language, of course. There's a paper from Google about in the last year or so, this 22 billion vision transformer. It's both very exciting to see that level of scale, but also it's just calling a spade. It's not nearly the same sort of scaling curves that we see in language. I think certainly in robotics, we're definitely in this data scarcity regime kind of all the time. I was trying to say today, like, maybe we should just go collect a whole bunch more data. Also, I was saying that we can sort of leverage the large scale pre-training from just text and internet scale vision to help robot training be more effective. But there's always, I think, the question of, do we need more structure to make robot learning much more data efficient, because we're just not in the same regime of data as in those other domains. These are all good questions, and yeah, the answers will evolve over time. Also, I turned my video off. It seems like the audio connection's a little bit better now.
I have a question in terms of what tasks you would encourage the audience to focus on. So you talked about data collection, but do you have specific thoughts on like what tasks we should focus on?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's different directions to push it. On the one hand, I think like just really focusing on depth of dexterity. There's so much robot dexterity that I think we can all imagine, but our robots are nowhere near that, and we don't necessarily need a wide diversity of tasks at all to sort of achieve that. And just focusing on some small set of tasks that really push dexterity, I think, is one. But then, of course, two, for those that want to kind of see the future of the robot manipulation capabilities that can really address a wide set of tasks, then of course we really need to be pushing diversity as well. Yeah, the question of which task can easily absorb just all of your time. You can just sit there twiddling your thumbs all day and sort of list out different tasks, and at some point I think we just got to kind of sit down and get a bunch of it and be really good at documenting and sharing and evaluation. So yeah, it's the perennial question, which data and which tasks, but I think we'll figure it out.
Okay, that's
Thank
thanks,
you.
Katie, for the great talk.
Thanks again for having me.
Thanks. Bye.
So, all right, next up, I think we have Pradeep from CME.